Go ahead.
All right, I'm calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee for the Marin Municipal Water District for June 23rd, 2022. Can I get a roll call?
Yes, Director Russell. Okay.
Here.
Oh, thank you. Director Schmidt,
Here.
Vice Chair Gibson,
Here.
and Chair Kohler, can I see your thumb? Oh, she's busy, but she is here for the record.
She's still trying to get in, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. Let's do a roll call for that.
Director Russell,
Here. Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibson,
Aye.
and Chair Kohler. Okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Do we have any public comment on anything that is not on the agenda?
There are none.
Okay.
A glass of water, please. Oh, that's probably mine. This is my last one.
That takes us to number one on our item, the monthly financial update. I assume, Brett, that's probably you.
Yes, that's right. That is me. Good morning, directors. My name is Brett Uppendahl. I'm the finance director for Marin Water. And today I am joined by our acting finance manager, Shelley Riley. And before I begin, I do want to thank Shelley for putting together the majority of the content in today's report, as well as for all of her efforts over the last couple months. She has stepped up and led the finance team here at the district. So I want to thank her for that before we start here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Today, let's see, sure. Hopefully you can all see that here now. Today we are presenting the monthly financial report for May 2022. The purpose of today's item is to provide your board with an overview of year-to-date financials. We've provided your board and the public with a packet that includes a staff report, as well as 5 attachments. It's a very similar format to prior year or prior month reports. And so this first slide on my screen here is going to focus on district revenues. With the close of May, we are now at 91.7% of the fiscal year. That's 11 of the 12 fiscal months. And reading the kind of the rows across there, you can see that we have about 75% of our budget for water revenues. In terms of the top line there, 75.6% of water revenue. If you look at our operating revenues, it's a little bit better, 78.9%, as we add in some of the smaller other revenues on the operating side. And then if you look at our total operating revenue, that represents about 80% of our total revenue. So it's a very significant line item here, significant group of revenues within the district's finances. And so the next couple of slides here will go into more detail about that operating revenue. If you look at the bottom half of this slide, you'll see our fire flow fee and our capital revenues are trending much closer to the fiscal year trend at 96% and 88% respectively. And so bottom line, for all revenues considered, that puts us at $90.5 million this year, which is 81.2% of the budget. So next slide here is our water sales. Again, these next 2 or 3 slides will kind of go a little bit deeper into our operating water revenues. This slide here separates the different components of water sales into our variable monthly water sales rate, our service charge, and our watershed fees. I will note that this slide and the next few are all on a 2-month lag. And so the numbers you're seeing for May largely represent activity here in the district in March. The largest of the 3 groups on your screen here is, of course, water sales. And those you can see at the bottom line there are about 69.9 or 70% of the budget for the year. And that is down about 14 or actually closer to 15% compared to last year's actuals. And that's just really reflective of our water conservation efforts taking hold throughout the year. So going to the third slide here, we have the two bars here, the red bars indicating last year's result, and then blue bars indicating this year's result. And again, we are at a 2-month lag in this view. Overall, as mentioned in the last slide, we're down about 15% compared to the prior year. You can kind of see the way the shape of the bars there are, that we made up a little ground in terms of overall sales in the months of February, March, and April. Here in May, as we've added that data point, we're a little behind last year's results. And so we didn't make up any more ground this month, but we're pretty close there. And so flip it over to the next slide here. This is year-to-date billed water consumption in terms of acre feet. And this actually breaks it down by customer class. And so a little bit more detail here. You can see the bottom line there is that we have a reduction of about 5,000 feet or 5,000 acre feet in total billed consumption.
Mhm.
And that looks like a little bit more than 20% reduction overall. Again, very consistent with the data we're seeing on the water supply presentations. The largest overall reduction is in the single family category. That's about 27%, so largest gross number, 27% overall reduction. And I would also note on this slide here, if you go down about 2/3 of the way down to irrigation, irrigation usage is down about 40% compared to the prior year. Again, this is as of activity in March.
Mhm.
So go here to this next slide, which is again another look into the operating revenues, operating water sales revenue. This is our tiered consumption as of May, again in acre feet through the 4 tiers of our billing or our revenue fees here. What you can see is that all categories are down in comparison to last year, and you can really kind of see that 4-year trend. Starting in fiscal year 18. That was kind of the assumption going into this year's budget cycle, and the assumption going forward was that was going to be our trend in terms of total consumption. Again, down in all categories. Tier 1 sales are down about 15% behind the prior year. Tier 2 and Tier 3 sales are actually both down about 45% compared to the prior year. And if you look up there, that's a little bit small in terms of the yellow in comparison, but yellow is Tier 4, and that's down about 50% compared to the prior year. So from a conservation standpoint, these are all really great numbers, but they also do have a pretty clear impact on the district's bottom line revenues. And so we'll get into that a little bit further here in the next couple slides. The final slide I have for you here on our revenues is just an update on our accounts receivable aging reports. And you can see this outlines the number of bills outstanding in the different categories in terms of how long they've been outstanding. Again, we're making improvements across the board here. And in particular, we're making improvements on the longer term accounts towards the bottom of the screen there. So I think all good news. We're better than we were last year. I think we're still trying to get back to where we were pre-pandemic, but this is good news, moving in the right direction in terms of getting our collections in.
Okay.
So a question, Brett, how does the funding from the state work into those past due accounts? We got that money. Is it credited back to their accounts so they disappear off this list, or it's not?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I think there's some special circumstances in terms of how we calculated in a specific time period, which accounts we could credit it back. But yeah, the COVID relief funds that we received a few months ago were applied to many of the accounts that you see on the screen here. So I would, I don't have the precise numbers in front of me, but I would imagine that makes up the lion's share of the improvement here in the last couple months. And so yeah, those dollars, to answer your question, were credited directly to the customer accounts, and that is definitely a contributing factor to the improvement.
But where it really, my question really is this: so we're getting a fair number of current past dues, because I see them now. It's unfortunate, the text is right on top of their table, but there's a large number paid off from the long 1 year past due kind of thing.
Yep.
That's probably where the money went. But like in 2022, we have 800, if I can read it right, 803.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fair number of fairly current past dues.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Director. I think, like I said, the COVID relief funds were applied to older accounts and probably likely hit the bottom 2 categories there, the 6 months and the 1 year past due. Anything as of the last 60, 90, or 30 days is going to be new because the time period in which we were able to apply those credits was actually looking back about a year and a half. So I think the newer accounts are outside of that credit period. And so, yeah, we'll continue to work with staff to monitor those, and we'll report out to your board if we're seeing any increasing trends going forward.
Could you, the next time you do this, could you break it into the tiers to see if we're having troubles at the tier 4s or we're having troubles at the tier 1s? Or unless you know that answer.
The tiers within these accounts receivable aging periods, so kind of across.
Yeah, just say for the 30 days, don't worry about the other ones, just the current ones.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, is it the normal average person or the higher users that are having troubles?
Yeah, we'll do.
What, Brett, what's the plan for the delinquent accounts? What are we doing? What's our procedure essentially?
We have quite a few, I think part of it's standard operating procedure. We always have some level of delinquent accounts. I think your board also approved a automatic payment plan for many of these accounts. So we're continuing to work with customer service to reach out and offer these payment plans to anybody who needs them. But as part of this, just as part of the run of the mill, we do have accounts that are late. We follow up on a monthly and a daily basis. And so, like I said, we'll keep monitoring that and report to your board. And hopefully the payment plans that your board has approved last year will start to show some improvement in this area as well.
Good, thank you.
Are we still under? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Thanks. I could be mistaken, but I feel like this is looking better than it has in the past. We're recovering a bit from the COVID hit, where so many people were really financially struggling and unable to pay these bills.
I think that's a good point, Director Kohler. I think we are improving. I did look in comparison this slide to a 2 years ago slide, and we are getting closer and closer to that pre-pandemic, kind of general operating, level. And so I do think, between the economic recovery, between the COVID relief funds we applied, and between just generally setting ourselves back on our feet, I think we are getting back to that pre-pandemic trend.
Yeah, so I think showing that trend would be helpful for the board, just, because I don't know that any of us expected to recover, immediately. It was very challenging, obviously, having COVID hit at the same time, as everything else that was happening. I think we do still have our moratorium on shutoffs in place, just to be clear about that.
Hopefully we do.
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
Okay, great. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Okay, so for this slide, I'm going to switch over to the expenditure side of the house. And this one is a little bit more kind of what you would expect for this time of the year. So again, we're at 91.7% of the fiscal year mark. Operating expense, which is those first 4 categories, summarized there about halfway through the page, we're at 86% overall. So that is very close to being on track for this time in the fiscal year. You can skip down to the next 2, the fire flow projects and district projects. Those are a little bit behind where you'd expect to be at 90% of the fiscal year, but those do not necessarily track on a linear basis. And so, a lot of construction and capital expenses are more lumpy over time. And so we wouldn't expect that to be exactly 90% at this point of the year, but those are on pace, especially when you include encumbrances. And so nothing out of the ordinary there. And so that's, again, there's what you'd expect to see at this time of the year on both sides of the house, both operating and in the capital expense areas. And so kind of taking that together, all of the revenue slides we talked about at the beginning, and then, the expense slides that we just showed, the net of that actually becomes our fund balance, right? And so the slide here shows our fund balance in millions. This is essentially the district's reserves. So the top, 4 or 5 categories there are categorized as restricted and or designated. So only a little bit of change there. I think the big change, you can probably see the second line down, is in our rate stabilization fund, where we've used a little over $7 million this year. And I think the big line here that we're going to be focusing on over the next couple months and probably even longer will be our unrestricted fund balance and operating, which is that kind of second category down there. That has decreased by almost $10 million this year. I have a couple more slides in the next few here. They'll talk about where we expect that to be at the end of the year and then going into next year. But as you kind of see, the total fund balance, we began the year with 88.1 million. We're about 73 million right now as of May. And so we're definitely using our reserves. And again, part of that is planned, part of that's out beyond our control. But I think that's one of our main focuses here in the next couple of months will be just keeping our eyes on those reserve levels and making corrective actions as needed. When you look at that reduction there of about $15 million, that represents about a 17% overall reduction in our reserve levels for this time of the year. The next couple slides will be kind of more of a transition to our projections, as I just mentioned, both, end of the year projections 1 month away, as well as into the beginnings of our projections for next year. And as I'm beginning this section, I just wanted to remind your board, we have a 2-year budget process here. So we're basically right in the middle of that 2-year process. We'll be beginning the next 2-year process this fall and getting into next winter. And so a lot of the data that we'll be getting in over the summer will help inform those actions and those recommendations we'll bring to your board as part of the next budget setting process. And then I did want to take a moment here to applaud your board and General Manager Hornstein and district management in the past for establishing such healthy reserves over the past number of years. I think the reserves that we do have been helping us to weather the current financial strain that we're seeing with the reduced water sales. And they also provided a lot of critical funding opportunities for us to address the water supply issues over the past year. So again, that's making our job easier or making it doable in the meantime. And then we'll have to kind of take all that into account as we set the budget up for next year. And as we establish some expenditure controls to make sure that we don't over rely on one-time reserves as we get into kind of more longer term ongoing operating issues. So the first slide here, in terms of projections, there's not a lot to project here by the end of the year. We have 1 month left. This is similar to the slides we had at the beginning in terms of water sales revenues. The horizontal blue bar at the bottom focuses you on May, showing that we have 1 month left to go. And I would kind of focus you more to the right-hand side of this in terms of percent of budget. Again, these are numbers I went over at the beginning, but we're only about 70% of budget overall for water sales. And we're about 20% or so behind where we'd expect to be at this time of the year. And so year to date, just as of May, as shown down there in the far right corner, we're down about $11.6 million in terms of total revenue loss in comparison to the budget that we would expect at this time of the year. So this next slide here plots that information on a linear graph or on a kind of a time-bound graph. And so you can really see how, the blue line at the top is the budget, where we'd expect to be, what we had programmed in for the year. And then the green line there underneath shows our actual results. And you can see that month over month, we certainly have been falling behind. And then if we project out that same general, about 20% conservation or about 20% lower than last year results for the next month, that will end the year with about a $12.8 million revenue loss in comparison to the budget again. And so that $12.8 million will be kind of what we feed into the next couple of slides here in terms of how that affects our fund balance. With this kind of a revenue shortfall, we would really expect to be prudent with our expenditures over the next year. And so this next slide here kind of shows our projected year-end expenses. And again, we're on track for the most part at this time of the year for where we'd expect to be in relation to our original budget. You can see here some of the bigger categories. We are expecting some salary savings due to vacancies, about $4 million. But unfortunately, most of that is going to be offset by the need to use those expenditures for water purchases to bolster our supply here in summer months. And so the bottom line is we don't really have a lot of expenditure savings this year to offset our revenue losses. And so, the math would say that just needs to come from reserves. And so again, that kind of feeds into our use of reserves for the year. And so, in terms of applying those reserves or applying those numbers into our reserve calculations, this slide here shows our unrestricted operating revenue or operating fund balance or our reserves here. The beginning balance on the top there was $32.6 million. When you factor in that $12.8 million revenue loss, offset partially by our COVID relief funds, and then you factor in the expenditure, savings on the personnel side and unexpected expenditures for cost of water purchases. The net impact, I think the very bottom line there too shows we have transferred in some from a rate stabilization fund, but the net impact we're projecting to end the year at $21.6 million in our unrestricted operating reserve. And so, math there would show we're using about $11 million in total from this reserve account. And again, that would be about a 30%, a little bit more than a 30% reduction in this particular fund balance.
Mhm.
And so this one here is my final number slide. And basically what this shows is 4 different scenarios, but really under kind of, two different kind of headers. Scenarios 1 and 2 there represent where we may be if we have another year of 20% conservation. So very similar year to this year, if next year ends up being a 20% conservation year. And then the second set of scenarios 3 and 4 there, those represent a 10% conservation level. So a little bit of a bump, a little bit of a kind of return to normal consumption patterns. Your board may recall that scenarios 3 and 4 over the last couple months represented a 5% scenario. But I think now, given the information we have here at the district, given the state level kind of messaging for conservation, and we think 10% is kind of a more likely kind of lower bound on that. So we revised these slides to be a 20% and a 10% scenarios. And then within each of these, we have 2 different scenarios going down the left-hand column. One being if conditions kind of dictate that we need to purchase additional 5,000 acre feet of water and pump Suluhuli. Those would be unbudgeted expenditures. And so we're showing, if we need to get to that point in the 20% conservation scenario and in the 10% conservation scenario. And then we also have alternates for if we don't need to get to that point of pumping and purchasing additional water. So I think the bottom line there is really what we want to focus your board on. And that is circled in red is the $1 million number. And so that really is, very, cutting it pretty close. If we get down to using 21.6, or this would be $20.6 million in reserves between the revenue losses and also the additional unbudgeted expenditures, that will leave us really thin. And so that's scenario 1 there. And so it's something we're definitely hoping to avoid this year. Scenarios 2, 3, and 4, range from a year-end fund balance in this category from 7 million up to 15 million. So those would still be significant uses of reserves. But those would at least leave us with a little bit of breathing room going into the next budget cycle. Either way, I think with any of these scenarios, we're going to be relying on reserves to some extent throughout the next years. And unlike in prior years, I think this year we may not experience a post-drought bump in water demand in the near term for either local reasons and/or statewide messaging, as I mentioned. And so I think what that means to me is that we will face some significant challenges to make sure we're living within our means, meaning with adjusting expenditures to live within the revenues that we're receiving. And it also may mean that we need to start examining some difficult trade-offs in the next budget cycle. So my final slide here is just a summary of what I have kind of mentioned.
I'm sorry, before you go on, can you go back? Can you go
Sure.
back for a second, Brett?
Yep.
So on the thank you. Can you just describe when you say 20% or 10%, what's your baseline that? Is that this year's use or is that going back to the 3-year average?
So what we're saying there is if we do a 20% conservation compared to what was budgeted. So we have a 2-year budget and that assumes
20% conservation. I'm asking about the water. When you say 20% conservation,
He's
right?
talking about money, Cynthia. He's reducing the money by those numbers.
I understand, and I'm not. I'm
So
talking about. I'm asking about the time frame. If I could just ask my question, that would be great. I really don't think I need to be interpreted, Larry. Thank you.
Well, I think you do because the
well, I
issue
don't.
is
So could
it's
you
not
stop?
water.
Larry,
He didn't do
stop.
it on a water
Larry.
basis.
Larry, stop. Brett.
so yeah,
what's the basis for-
go ahead, Director.
No, that's okay. Why don't you go ahead and answer my question the way I asked it, please?
So the way I heard it is that the numbers here we plugged in terms of financial basis were for a 20% loss in revenue. And so I think that's based on the trends that we're seeing in the water sales and consumption, but it is translated in this slide into just a 20% loss in revenue compared to the budget. And so what that's intended to do is intended to reflect the current year usage in the sense of consumption overall, how that translates to our revenues in terms of around that 20% mark. And so 20% would be a continuation of this year's trends, basically on actuals. 10% would be essentially halfway between what we're seeing this year and what we had budgeted previously. And so my understanding is the previous budget was based on a 3-year trend, and now we're below that going forward.
Okay. So I think the way that this will be easier for the public to understand is if you're providing what that baseline is, because obviously there's this there's the assumption, when it's 20%, when we're talking about percentages, the baseline, right, what it is 20 or 10% of needs to be clear. So I'm going to suggest that that be provided in future presentations because it's not entirely clear.
Yeah, we can do that, definitely. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so yeah, these are again the scenarios that we're kind of beginning to project now. And as I'll say in my summary slide here, again, this is what I mentioned throughout the morning. The fiscal challenges we have in fiscal 22 will continue likely into fiscal 23, and we'll continue to require the use of our one-time reserves to plug the gap. I didn't touch on it too much here today, but I think we all are kind of aware of the economic headwinds coming our way in a variety of areas. And so I think, to the budget and to the financial side of it, what that mostly means to me is that we will likely also see increase in operational costs, both, this coming year and into the future as we see inflationary, measures hitting across the board. And so not only will we have a revenue, kind of picture to look at, but we'll also have probably increasing operational costs just to maintain current operations. As we've all been talking about for the last couple of months, the severity of the revenue shortfalls is very dependent on rainfall and on overall water conservation levels. And so those things we'll continue to monitor and plug into the next year's budget, into next year's financial forecasts. And I think this summer will go a long way. The summer and fall will go a long way into informing those. And then in the meantime, the district is working on targeted actions to reduce and contain our expenditures to make sure we are living within our means and keeping as many options as we can open going forward. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to your board for any questions. And again, with the idea that we will come back to your board later this summer and continue to provide updates as we get information in.
Okay. I have passed the gavel, I think, to Cynthia, who's functional again.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why Zoom wasn't
Yeah.
paying attention to today. I don't have any, well, I mean, I think there's a fair amount here to discuss. I think the concern that I have that we've raised earlier, so I don't know that we need to belabor it, is I think there are other ways of dealing with the deficit. And I'm a little concerned. Well, let me just ask it this way, Brett. I mean, you seem to be suggesting that the primary way to address this deficit is through reductions to the conservation program. And it's not entirely clear to me that from a financial perspective, there's the long term and the short term, that is prudent for us, or that it really is the only option. So can you speak to that? Because that is the impression that's been provided here over the last several months.
So I would just like to say that was not my suggestion at all. I think, it's up to your board to kind of set policies and set direction there. And I think we have, a long months of discussion along those lines. What I'm trying to do here is just trying to lay out the financial impact if conservation or consumption, I guess we could change it to that, consumption levels, whatever we're selling in terms of water sales and whatever, the public demand is, and that has a bottom line effect. And so by no means is there only one solution to this. I think, in any kind of a financial planning scenario, we have to balance short term, long term, and there's many options in the toolkit that we have to use. And I think we need to be very strategic in this. I think things are changing quickly, both, like I said, on the expenditure side, as well as a lot of other factors here. And so some are beyond our control, some are within our control. But I think the idea here is that, again, your board has established very healthy reserves going into this year. I think there was a plan to use reserves to offset some minor bumps in the road. And I think now we're halfway through the budget. And so I think we need to really just start thinking more kind of holistically about where we're going to end the year next year and what that means to the overall longer term budget. And again, I wouldn't say there's one solution or another. I think we need quite a few tools on the ready to be able to attack this from a financial perspective, to make sure we're making ourselves solvent, again, both short term, long term, and into the future for sustainable services to our community here.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I think what I'm really raising, though, is how it looks, right? So obviously it's a board decision. I'm just saying we've seen this chart several times now, and the suggestion, the implication, when conservation is the only piece that is highlighted that way as the opportunity, is that it's the only answer. So I understand that the decision lies with the board. It appears, though, that you, as the chief financial officer for the district, are saying this is the problem, and you see what I mean? It appears that is the inference that could be drawn. So I'm just wondering if there is another way to portray, because yes, we are a water provider, but I think there's been a lot of conversation about the business model here. And as you are certainly aware, water utilities all over the West and even nationally are moving away from this idea that, to be fiscally healthy, the only thing we can really do is sell more and more water. And in a time of climate change and, what that means locally and regionally in terms of resources, that will be ultimately a board decision, of course, but the suggestion that that is the only business model that we can pursue, I think I'm really just more concerned about what I'm hearing from you is an unintended inference.
Does
Yes,
it make sense on the chart you showed that started this discussion on this point, if you use some term other than conservation, what you're really talking about is reduction or increase in water use, which comes from all sorts of areas, conservation being one. So maybe using a different term to capture the concept there might be more appropriate.
Definitely, I agree, and then we will make those adjustments in the next month's update for your board.
I would maybe just add to the discussion, noticing on Brett's slide that conservation wasn't, I think, the only reduction shown. There was a significant hold off in staffing, if you notice, that may be the biggest category. And I think in one of the prior slides, there was a bullet around controls that the district is looking at implementing in terms of reducing our financial expenditures. So just to point that out.
Right.
No, I think that's fair. I think the question is, I didn't see them on that one slide though about conservation, right? I mean, it was like the red circle. Maybe if they're shown together in some way as, all of the options for addressing the current financial issues. And I know that what I'm suggesting, Brett, is challenging because this is a monthly meeting and you're dealing with things on a short-term basis. But longer term, the alternative, which is we sell more water, we bring in more water, we have much more expensive supplies. I'm not sure that as a business model or as a fiscal model for ratepayers, that's going to be where the board lands. It may be. It would be very much in contravention of trends that we're seeing in the Western United States and other drier areas. But, I guess there's some question there in my mind about how we show this, right? Because, and I guess I'm putting a challenge to you. You're here to talk about these very current numbers and to deal with this very current situation. And we at the board and all of, executive management have to deal with that. But that also has to be balanced against, well, what is the insinuation? What is the implication of what that means for our longer term investments? So I'm not sure how you can bring that in here, but I just know that members of the public may look at that slide, the big red circle, and go, oh, well, we're done with this. We've just got to go out and, bring in as much water as possible because that's what we need to do for our fiscal health. So I just think that we need to be conscious of that, even in these monthly reports. Does that make sense?
Very much so, yes, thank you. We'll make sure we address that in the next monthly report.
Thank you so much, Brett. I mean, I think you're, as you're getting up to speed, you're starting to get definitely a sense of how we are trying to communicate carefully with our customers to, in part, express, I think as Director Kohler is saying, that we're seeing a shift not only in the climate, but also how we will probably need to approach our management structure and our approach going forward. So thank you for this financial report. I can see your awareness of our financial situation, and you're correctly, I think, raising the right red flags that we've got. We have a needle to thread here a little bit, and we need to be thoughtful, and we're glad that we've got you on board.
Thank you, Director.
I concur. It's great to see you. Do we have any other board comments on the financial update? Okay. Do we have any public comments on the financial update?
Yes, Larry Minikes. Go ahead, Mr. Minikes.
Good morning. Listening to all this, I'm just scratching my head a little bit. If all of us are going to the grocery store, we're seeing what's happening. Prices are just going through the roof. Go by any gas pump, you see what's happening. You have operational costs going up. You have revenues going down. It calls for an increase in rates. And I understand it's a year where we're in elections. It's very difficult to do something like this. It's very difficult to talk about it. It's understood. It's reality. But it's really hurting the district that we're not looking at this. And I did a quick back of the envelope calculation. It seems about $6 per month would cover a lot of the shortfall right now. And I'm asking why we're not having this discussion, at least having this discussion about looking at our rate structure. Every other water district is. Everyone here on this call is well aware of that. And I think there has to really be a change in the way we look at rate increases and not look at them as a failure of the district, but rather as a need. It seems like what I mean by this is every time we come to rates, it seems like a battle. It shouldn't be a battle. It should be part of doing yearly business. It should be and if there was a way to build in rate increases that did not require board votes, that were mandated by the need for infrastructure upgrades, to cover shortfalls, it would seem that we could keep the district running smoothly, because we're cutting costs, we're cutting services, we're cutting programs, and it seems we could do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. I just want to make a quick comment in response, since this is an agendized item. So I'm going to agree and disagree with you. I think, well, speaking for myself, but I expect for most board members, I think we all accept that rate increases are what we need to do. I think over the last 15 years, we have regularly increased rates. Certainly there are members of the public that aren't happy, and we have done that. It's more or less 5-0 votes each time. So I think I'm going to disagree with you that we are, not that we shy away from raising rates. And today's conversation, it's a financial update. So this is not where we are talking about raising rates, but I don't think there's any question that is in our future, in our very near future. It's what we need to be doing. I think a number of us on the board have said that we need to agendize that sooner rather than later. So with all due respect, I don't see the evidence that this is a district that has not been raising rates. We haven't recently because of the COVID crisis and the economic downturn. I think those are good reasons not to. But, I think we have been second to none in, well, I wouldn't say second to none, I'll get myself in trouble for that. But I think we have been very much in line with our colleagues in going forward and raising rates. And I don't think there's any question that that's where we need to go. It's just not what we were talking about today. This was the monthly financial update. But I don't know if any other board members want to weigh in on Larry's comments. And I will say, I don't see any rate increases without board approval. That's what boards are here for, is to set public policy, and believe that that's what we need to do going forward. So if other board members want to weigh in on this, or I can be the only one to be out there saying we need to raise rates, whatever you guys want, I'm easy. Okay, any other board comments? Then I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, staff, for an informative.
More questions if I'm from the public.
Oh, I thought I asked it for.
There are no further comments.
Oh, no?
Right, I did ask.
Okay.
Okay, have a good day, everybody.
All right, thanks
Have a
a lot.
good day, folks.